Hello, and welcome to this edition of Secure Networks, the Endace Packet Forensic Files, with your host, Michael Morris. This episode's very special guest is James Spiteri, Director of Product Management Security Analytics at Elastic. James, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Michael. So good to be here today. My background is entirely cybersecurity and security operations. So I've been in the trenches, I've led security operations teams, I've built security operations centers. That led me to joining Elastic about 6.5 years ago as their first, let's say, solutions engineer focused on helping customers implement Elastic for security. That was well before we ever had a security product. I spent some time doing that, then I moved into product marketing. Now my focus is leading our product management efforts in security, specifically for what we've been doing in generative AI and machine learning. So yeah, very, very happy to be here. I always like talking anything cyber, so hopefully I don't bore people by going on and on and on.
Oh, your experience is great, and we really appreciate you taking the time to join us. Your background and diversity and things you've done is exactly what we hope to achieve on this, is share your technical expertise and experiences. So again, thanks for joining. Where I kind of want to start, James, is really talking about nation state cybersecurity threats and how they've evolved in recent years. And what does it mean in terms of requirements for SIEM vendors?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the biggest trend for nation states is the sophistication, right? Like these are very well-funded attacks, which means they can be extremely sophisticated. You know, this is not some kid in a bedroom doing something. It's a whole team of people who are very well-funded with a very clear targeted goal. So the sophistication is insane from these attacks, right? And what we mean by sophistication is, they're going to be custom malware is going to be written, like all these different techniques. So this is not like using, something they got off the dark web and just going to spin that out. This is very, very targeted. We've seen extensive use of supply chain. This isn't new, but over the last couple of years, that's every major nation state breach that we've seen has involved some form of supply chain attack, right? Whether that's, what happened with SolarWinds a few years ago, or beyond that as well with package managers. Like we've seen this very, very extensively, right?
Right.
We've also seen the big use of cloud infrastructure, right? Mm-hmm. Because it is the easiest way to spin up huge architectures to do very sophisticated types of attacks, right? So that's kind of like the trends that we've seen over the last couple of years, and I say last couple, but even over the last decade, right? Like these mm-hmm. things have started to really get emphasized there. What's really fascinating is when it is so targeted. Some of the attacks we've seen are so bespoke to the targeted organization that mm-hmm. it's just phenomenal. Like the level of investment that would have had to be made, the research, probably some form of insider threat. It's really crazy how well crafted these are, like very, very hard. Now, of course, what that means for, SIEM requirements is they have to cater for this. And the way I like to think about it is I don't differentiate too much between a nation state attack and just any other attack. It's just you need a lot more coverage and you need to be able to be good at it. And what we mean coverage is, if you are really going to be able to spot these attacks, first of all, your SIEM needs to allow you to assume breach, right? So that's kind of a philosophy you need to have as a security team, but your SIEM should allow you to do that. So the way you craft detections and the detections that it allows you to craft and build mm-hmm. need to be pretty sophisticated, which means you need to have various different types of threat detection techniques. Obviously, visibility is a big one, right? SIEMs need to allow their users to bring in any data source they need. This could be, and when we say data source, traditionally, again, we speak 10, 15 years ago, SIEMs were very focused on perimeter devices, network stuff, mm-hmm. Very, very basic. Thankfully, we moved more into like being able to collect things from hosts and operating systems, mm-hmm. like EDR platforms or whatever. But now comprehensive visibility is, if your microwave has a log, your SIEM should allow you to pull that in. You know what I mean? I'm obviously exaggerating, but they should allow you to do that without any restriction is what I'm saying. So anything you feel your organization has, which is going to be relevant for you to be able to spot these kinds of attacks, it should not, it shouldn't make it hard for you to bring it in, but also shouldn't penalize you for bringing it in, right? And when I say penalizing, it needs to be able to cater for the load of these additional data sources. There's some of the more obvious stuff, like having more advanced techniques like entity analytics and user behaviors. Generative AI these days is going to be very, very crucial. So yeah, that SIMs need to be able to allow you to do that. So and again, there's a bit of a fine line between nation state, but also just generally, right? Like these things now, I want to put them on an even playing ground, because what you need to detect nation state is very, very going to be very similar to what you need to be able to detect any other attacks. It's just nation state are so targeted usually and so well funded that there might be a few more things you need in terms of data sources, really, rather than techniques.
No, those are excellent points, and I completely agree with you. And I think if you hit the mark on nation state kind of requirements, you're going to hit above the mark on a lot of industry enterprise level requirements. So you're spot on there. You hit a lot of requirements that you've seen evolve. Are there specific capabilities that are now considered essential for SIEM vendors to really counteract some of these sophisticated level attacks?
Yeah, I think everything, machine learning style detections are absolutely essential. Of course, because it should be table stakes by now, but unfortunately not all SIEMs think about it in the same way. But having more than just the typical correlation style searches and rules and that sort of thing is definitely needed. Like, you need to be able to build a baseline of what's happening, which usually needs some form of supervised or unsupervised machine learning. And then you need to apply, again, even generative AI these days as well takes that to the next level, right? That just allows you to do even more than what you used to be able to do. Again, things like entity analytics and user behavior techniques are, once again, table stakes, but it also depends on how you combine them with other techniques. And I think that's really important here. For someone using a SIEM, what they want to do is solve the problem. And it should be up to the vendor to suggest the best mechanism to do it, whether that's using some entity analytics approach or machine learning or correlation. It should just all operate on the data in the same way, which not every SIEM vendor does. Some do really well, some don't. Some go down very specific path and only allow you to do things in one way, which works really well for certain use cases. But then if you try to do something else which goes out of that boundary, you'll struggle, right? So that's where I think that is kind of the capability I see essential. Let the user decide what they want to do and to lower their risk, and then just make it easy for them to do it based off all the capabilities that have become table stakes, so to speak.
No, that's an excellent point. And you mentioned AI and machine learning a number of times, and everybody's talking about that now as part of the component of their platform. But are there specific roles or functions that those technologies must play in SIEMs for identifying complex nation state attacks, techniques, procedures?
So obviously I'm tiny bit biased because I do a lot of work with AI and machine learning here at Elastic, but and
you guys got a great platform, clearly. So
I'd like to think so, yeah, right? Yes. And our customers do as well. But what I still like to separate them into two buckets. Like, when I say two buckets, the generative AI era and the pre-generative AI era, which SIEMs have been doing machine learning for a very long time. EDR platforms have been doing machine learning for a very long time, supervised, unsupervised, those sort of things. Where generative AI has really shown its value is the way these large language models are able to interpret data points. Like, that is their core capability here, and not only interpret data points, but give you results based off how they interpret those data points. So, if the first thing people think about with generative AI is like a chatbot, which, yes, I mean, obviously that's extremely powerful. You could do really cool things there. You could have it answer questions that traditionally would be very hard to answer in non-natural language terms. But these models, given like extensive data to work on, are able to do fascinating things, like spotting attacks in the noise of alerts that we have. And if we take the nation state example, typically where most organizations get hung up on is that nation state actor gets lost in the mess of everything else they have to deal with.
Right.
It's very common that, as a security operations team, you're expected to deal with thousands of alerts every hour. And unfortunately, that's become the norm, right? We hope to see people work around that and fine-tune their alerts, but the reality is most don't, because they either don't have the capacity or the time to do it. So what ends up happening, again, especially in the concept of nation state attacks, is that the handful of those alerts which matter in that huge mess that you have get missed.
Right.
So we've seen and we've tried and tested that generative AI is able to really hone in on those alerts that matter, right? And putting it to good use that way, as an example. So in Elastic, we call this attack discovery. I don't want to make this a product pitch in any way, but
no, that's all right.
That is where we've seen the absolute efficacy of AI really, really helping, right? And complementing the human. I am a firm believer that there's no such thing as a fully autonomous SOC, in my opinion, or a security operations team. I think generative AI, especially, is there to make people better.
Right.
And if we use it effectively, it can absolutely make people better. It also will help the problem that we have in the industry of people getting bored of what they do, and we lose those people and they go somewhere else. We've seen that really, really helping. So in the generative AI era, that's where I feel this technology is really, really powerful. It also helps with a lot of the mundane tasks.
Right.
So if we take away the burden of doing things that with AI that people just don't want to do, and have them focus on the fun stuff, the cool stuff, the exciting stuff in security, that would be, make everyone more successful, spot attacks with more efficiency, and just get everyone working in a much more efficient way. So that's the generative AI side. Like the traditional machine learning side is equally as important. And the reason it is, especially we talk about the unsupervised side, and if people listening in aren't too familiar what unsupervised machine learning is, essentially it's the concept of having a machine learning model built off of your data, which learns what something is, when something is normal and when it deviates from that norm. Right. And this is going to be really, really important, and has proven to be important when something just happens which you're not going to get from a correlation alert, right? So if these models identify that there's some really abnormal behavior that they've never seen in the past for a specific user, a specific host, a service, being able to be told about that because of what this model has found is very, very valuable. And this is something, thankfully, most vendors and SIEMs have it, and they provide it, and it's great that they do. It's really important that it's easily consumable as well. A lot of people in the industry get a bit put off by machine learning because sometimes it's a bit of a black box, right? And if that's happening, that's a shame, because when this technology is understood and the power of it is understood, it's a game changer. Like again, this is pre-generative AI. This is like the traditional machine learning concepts, and most people use it without even knowing, right? Like if you have a modern ADR solution, almost all of them are using like supervised models to detect malware these days, right? As an example. And that's proven to be so effective versus like a signature-based approach, or at least complementing a signature-based approach. Like, look how effective that has been. You can apply that exact same kind of logic to your detection rules inside of a SIEM. So yeah, like that's kind of where the importance of AI and machine learning come in. And we really hope, at least with what we've been doing, we've been trying to make that obvious. But unfortunately, sometimes it gets shrouded in all the marketing noise about it. So, but I would encourage, again, anyone listening in, like, do your research about how these things can help, try it out, because like once you do find at least one use case where something like AI and machine learning helps you, it will open up the doors to all the others. So that would be my advice.
No, that was a great breakdown and explanation of the difference between the two, of generative AI and machine learning, because I don't think it is often confused in marketing and obfuscated in the marketing messages. So very good clarification of that. So how do you see SIEMs needing to adapt to comply with the latest national and international cybersecurity regulations and standards, things such as NIST and CMMC and GDPR and DORA and things like that? What do you see?
Yeah. So the biggest one, and like what's almost common equally between all of these standards, is how you deal with data, how you retain it, and what you do with it after.
Yep.
So SIMs need to be able, like they absolutely need to provide a way for you to manage data effectively, retain it effectively, and also in a cost-effective manner, right? So especially if you take things like GDPR, M2131, like all these public sector initiatives. What they really need you to do is have SIM retained for a certain period of time, your SIM retained data for a certain period of time, and then make it easily accessible during an incident. So that's typically something SIMs have struggled with just because of the sheer volume of data they need to deal with. And usually it's not particularly cost effective to do it. So that is something that definitely needs an adaptation in the market and the industry, the way they think about data overall. Obviously, there's things like how do you maintain data integrity? Like DORA is going to be a big push for this, right? Like how do you ensure that from when a log was originated, for example, to when you've dealt with it with an incident, how do you make sure it's maintained? So providing mechanisms to do that, whether that's hashing data as it's coming in, providing a way to validate it. These are all things that are really, really important for SIMs to be able to do. But also just the ability to know what people are doing within the SIM as well, right? And I think that's some SIMs do this really well. Sometimes it's a bit of a struggle, depending on like the mechanisms that are used for data retrieval, depending on like how the nitty-gritty of how things are built. Sometimes these things can get a bit more complex to do. But I think like it's funny, but it's also a good thing that there's so many overlaps between these compliance requirements, right? Like I think back in, what was it, 2017, 2018, GDPR was the first eye-opener in terms of having a really proper process around these things, which was actually way more tricky for most organizations to do versus the technical requirements, and all the headaches that brought with it. I won't comment too much further than that, but there's also like the process side of it. Like I think sometimes we get lost in the weeds a bit of what does my SIM need to do. But a lot of people forget that 99% of this is process. So like if your SIM helps you putting those processes together, utilize it, right? Like so that's another thing I would say, that SIM vendors, anything they can do to help on the process side as well. So whether that's if there's a process to show a visual representation of what you've done during an incident, like have your SIM do that for you. Like another really good example of where generative AI is really powerful, like just having a reporting standard, that having like generative AI give you the exact template based off of the incidents which happened in your SIM means a human doesn't have to stay doing that, and you've eliminated that very complex manual process to do it. So that's also another area where SIMs can really help.
No, great point on that around the process point of view. So what are some of the main challenges in integrating SIMs with other national security defense systems, and how can those integrations be really improved, right? I mean, because a lot of countries have a lot of legacy gear and equipment and tools. How do you see that improving, and what are some of the key hooks there that you want to highlight?
For sure. This is always going to be a challenge, I think, because I take it from the stance of being in the vendor shoes. I also take it as like someone who's consumed SIM technology in the past. It's very hard for a vendor to make sure that they can cover every single technology type, right? And the hardest part is actually getting access to the technology they need to cover. So typically, you'd work with a partner, you'd work with someone who has access to that technology, and you see how to integrate there. But it's still not always going to be possible, right? Just because you just can't cater for everything. So I think what SIM should be doing with these type of integrations is having, like, I like to call it a fallback mechanism. So let's say there's some legacy device, right? You're not going to install an agent on that, right? You're not going to write specific custom bespoke software that's going to run there, like for the very, very few organizations that need it. So what do you do, right? What's the next best thing? Like, what's the next best way to try and identify what's going on around that system? You fall back to like network stuff, right? Like what we used to do in the past for very long, right? And if you're able to at least hone in on being able to capture like network events surrounding that type of device and making sure your SIM can cater for that accordingly, you've already given someone a leg up to just having no visibility into that. And if you're able to do that, and then you can start, of course, to build more like at least some generic detections on top of that, right? Even if you don't have really high fidelity data, but at least you'd be able to do something around it and not be completely in the dark. So having fallbacks, I would say, is really important for like these types of integrations, right? If you can't be on the device for whatever reason, see what you could do around the device, right? Or on the way to the device or something like that. So like that's kind of like when I was put in that situation, when I was having to monitor these kind of systems, that's exactly what I did. And it gave me a bit more confidence, like at least. So but yeah, that's kind of the way that I think about that there.
No, those are some excellent points there. And as we know, a lot of government agencies are, responsible for critical infrastructure, which has some of that legacy gear that you certainly can't put agents and collectors on everything. So no, excellent point there. How important is real-time threat intelligence in modern SIEMs for detecting and mitigating, security threats? And are there some sources that you find most reliable?
I think threat intelligence is like your best leg up, right? Like especially really good threat intelligence sources. Or when I say leg up, if someone's already seen and confirmed that a specific like indicator is bad, that means you don't have to evaluate that, right? Or at least do minimal evaluation on it, right? So it's always a net benefit if managed correctly, right? So real-time threat intelligence is really good if it's well maintained. If it's not, it's just a headache and a nuisance. So whatever source you implement, just make sure it's reputable, but also well maintained and up to date. I think it's important for SIEMs to give you an easy mechanism to do that. Like, having a shelf life for certain IOCs and that sort of thing is really, really important, or a time to live, as we say. But it is extremely powerful. Like I'm a fan of various different sources. Like, of course, there are things like VirusTotal, Malware Bazaar, anything by the abuse.ch team is amazing in my opinion. I've been using their feeds for a very, very long time. Vendors like Recorded Future, like there's so much. But also sometimes what's really helpful, but it's usually very hard to consume as intelligence and doesn't fall into the real-time bucket, is stuff like threat intelligence reports in terms of like PDF content that vendors write, or articles that they write, right? Unfortunately, that's typically very hard to consume as a like a SOC analyst, because it's not directly it's not typically in my SIEM, right? It's not I can't go to a view, let me see all my reports that I have and click on them and search them. But this is another area, for example, where generative AI really helps, because generative AI, if we take the more traditional chatbot approach, there are mechanisms in generative AI where you can supplement these like PDF sources as knowledge to your team. So if there's like if there's an incident that you're going through and you wanted to ask the question to a model like, have we seen any similar incident or similar IOCs in all our threat report PDFs that we've been accumulating, they can answer that question if you supply that knowledge. This is a technique called retrieval augmented generation, like and it should be table stakes for any sort of generative AI capability that you provide to your users. And if you do that, and then you get kind of the best of both worlds, where you can leverage the traditional threat intelligence source in real time, but then you can leverage this huge wealth of information that is usually just really hard to operationalize. And there's just probably sitting in some folder on your desktop somewhere doing nothing. And now you can put it to good use. I've seen that like in practice, and like some of our customers have started to do that, where it's just phenomenal. Like you get such a huge leg up by being able to leverage that intelligence as well, versus just what you get from a real-time threat feed, and combining them both. Of course.
That's a great point. And I read some of those PDF articles and some other podcasts that talk about some of the insider threats and things like that. Speaking of that topic, how can SIEMs be leveraged to identify and address insider threats, which are becoming more increasingly used as tactics by nation state actors, right? Because some of these government agencies are so big and so complex and so many avenues in. Where's the SIEM's role with insider threats?
This is going to be very similar to my the answer to the first question and the machine learning question. I think the only way you're going to really get a grasp of if you have an insider threat is, one, if you have all the right data sources to do it, and two, if you have the right detection mechanisms to do it. So like this is where unsupervised machine learning shines for insider threats, right? Because if you've modeled what your users typically do or what systems typically do, an insider is doing something very different to what it's modeled, these are going to be the first mechanisms that flag this. You can, of course, do it in the traditional like search approaches, but there's a lot more fine tuning you have to do and get the detection right. It's not impossible, but it just takes typically a lot more work. I will say, of course, entity analytics, like knowing what entities you actually have, observing them, being able to, identify when one is not acting as they should. These are all really important mechanisms. So it's not going to be too different to like what we specified to be able to like how the SIMs need to adapt. But yeah, I fully concur that insider threat is usually the, for the bigger attacks we've seen, apart from like supply chain, insider threat is usually the easiest way in, right? Like if a nation state is able to get access to a person, convince them, bribe them, that because we've seen this happen. Like that's typically that's much easier for them to get in as opposed to compromising a whole supply chain for the most
brute
part.
force. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. But yeah.
So. No, excellent points on that, and completely agree with you on the ease of using that approach with insider threats. What are some advanced correlation or analytics capabilities you believe are really necessary in future generations of SIMs to really have an effective response capability to multi-vector attacks, right? And as you described earlier, nation-state attacks are among some of the most sophisticated, right? And these multi-vectors are becoming, I'll say, more commonplace. I don't know if that's the best choice of words, but is there some advanced correlation things that you think need to still evolve or emerge for many SIMs?
I think a lot of SIMs have very advanced correlation techniques already, which is good. I think it goes back to my point of being able to combine techniques together. So a lot have gone down the path of having an exceptionally powerful like searching and querying workflow.
Yeah.
But then it's very hard to combine it with the machine learning results, for example.
Right.
And I think that's where most SIMs still need to improve. I would say almost all of them in this case. Like, it should be easy to be able to leverage multiple different correlation or detection capabilities together to really find a bad actor or or a nation state or whatever it may be. And I think only then, when you start to combine all these things, you're really going to get a leg up. Right. Especially for if things are hitting multiple different systems, things are leveraging different types of techniques. This is really where these things are gonna shine. Like if you're able to combine all these technologies together, because in a silo they can be useful, but not so much as if you combine them, right? So like that's why that's really what I feel is necessary here. I'm sure people have other opinions, but I think we've gone like from the advanced querying capabilities. We've been able to piggyback off of some of like query industry standards, like SQL as a concept is very powerful. Like exposing that to a security analyst and making it easier for them is really powerful. Certain vendors have set the standard for this, and everyone else has followed in their footsteps, and it's become a norm that first I query and then I do everything else secondary. And I think that is the paradigm that really needs to change here in the advanced correlation world. Like it should all come together, right? It shouldn't be one and then you think of something else later. It should really all come together.
Right. No, that's an excellent point. James, I always like to wrap our interviews with asking you to put on your prognosticator hat for a second and look out 6 to 18 months. And I know that's an eternity in cybersecurity. What's one thing you recommend our listeners to look out for or think about over that time period in the ever shifting battle for cybersecurity?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's funny because in the past 6 to 18 months wasn't that big of a time shift, but now it really is. So what I mean by that is, again, putting on like my generative AI hat. What attackers and what we as defenders are going to be able to do in the next 6 to 18 months based off of the advances that are being made in generative AI is going to change dramatically. And we've seen this happen in the last 6 and 18 months. Like, so what we were able to detect and respond to even a year ago is now totally different because of this new technology. And I think the industry has really understood that. Obviously, attackers are going to understand that in the exact same way. So we're going to see things that we've never really anticipated before, like being able to deal with deepfakes in a way that was not possible. Like I mentioned, we now have incredible technology that with one single line of prompting, you can get a video that looks so close to reality that is very, very hard for someone to identify that. And obviously, attackers are going to leverage that. And not just this, right? There's so much technology in that vein where there's going to be a real fine line in what traditional methods of detections are going to allow you to do. So you kind of have to fight fire with fire. Right. And if you're not leveraging generative AI to fight generative AI, you're going to be missing out. And I say that like in all honesty because we've seen this happen, but we're going to see it happen way more in the next 6 to 18 months because these models are getting way more powerful and they're getting way more accessible, and both in terms of cost and also like the open source variants. Right. So I'm going to keep beating that drum because I think that is going to be where so much focus is for both cyber and beyond. So.
No, that's you are spot on that one. So I think you nailed that one. James, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us and share your tremendous insights in how to better secure networks. We'd ask our listeners to tune in next time for another edition of the Endace Packet Forensic Files. For more information about Endace's network packet capture platform and our integrations with our fusion technology partners like Elastic, please go to endace.com. James, again, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate your insights.
Thanks again for having me. Really appreciate it.